What happens if the Mariners don't make the playoffs?
I don't know how at this point they could miss the playoffs and absolutely nothing changes. Something's going to change if the Mariners don't make the playoffs this year. It's inevitable. Now, there's 4 different options for what could change. I think we're going to go through the possibilities of all of them, and then we'll talk about at the end like what we think is the most likely. The 4 options are, before we dive into them, front office and coaching staff go. They clean house. There's the option of the front office stays, coaching staff goes. The third option is the coaching staff could stay, the front office could go, or the last option is everybody stays. Is there one we want to break down? Like there's pieces to each of this. So if we were gonna start at the top where they truly cleaned house, first off, that'd be a pretty bold decision. That'd be a lot. For as poor of a tone as this podcast has been painted in, because for good reason, it's been some really, really bad sledding over the last month for the Mariners. They're still on pace to be a high 80s win team. To totally clean house after that probably feels like a lot. And that would also mean the organization believes that they need a brand new regime to help turn the tides and start fresh, which, if you want to use the 54% method, doesn't really line up with what we know our ownership's belief, which is, listen, ownership's going to tell us that, they won't tell us this, but there's probably an internal belief. We can't say this for certain, but we are saying probably an internal belief that they're still competitive. They're still getting people out to the ballpark. It's good enough to keep people excited. And because of that, they would not totally clean house. Am I right about that?
Sure. But ownership could also sit there and think, our average fan, we're down on average 3,000 fans a game this year.
Are they?
They say that's significant? Yeah. I was curious. I went and looked. 33,000 last year, 30,000 this year. Announced a crowd of 22,000 tonight. That number will go down. Could be. It's not an ultra significant number, but it's notable. 3,000 people is a lot per game. That's a lot of people. Ultimately, I don't think scenario 1 will happen.
No.
I don't think scenario 1 will happen. You know why I don't think it will happen? Because despite everything that's happened on the big league roster, especially this season, with just utter lack of performance across the board, it's not a hot take to say the Mariners have never drafted and developed better than they have under this regime. Never in their franchise's history. And before you say, TJ, that's pretty bold. First of all, let's just remember what franchise we're talking about. If the Mariners had drafted it and developed well in their entire history, we wouldn't be sitting here and saying they have made the playoffs 5 times in 47 seasons. Am I out of line?
No. Because if the Mariners knew how to draft and develop, they would have taken Clayton Kershaw or Max Scherzer or even Tim Lincecum back in 2006. They would have taken Troy Tulowitzki in 2005. They would have taken either Anthony Rendon or Francisco Lindor in 2011. The list goes on. If they knew how to properly evaluate talent, they wouldn't have missed on all those draft picks and instead drafted Brandon Morrow, Danny Holtzen, and Jeff Clement. Right? And there's a bunch of others.
Yeah. So I don't think that's a hot take. You don't even have to pay attention to the offense at all. All you need to do is look at the Mariners rotation and realize no other team in baseball has pulled off the achievement that this regime has done with that rotation alone that puts people in seats. So that's why the decision makers at the top would sit back and say, I think that would be a little irrational. Despite everything else that is happening, I don't think that would be the best idea. And why? Because you could say, because there's so much information available now, we could hire someone else who will do just as good of a job. And if you decide to take that risk, that's fine. That's totally okay. But here's what you do know. You do know this regime can draft and develop. And if there's one thing we do know about this ownership, they don't like paying money to people who are not in the organization, players, executives, coaches, etc. They don't like doing that. So why would they want to pay all this money for buyouts and stuff? I know there's some contracts expiring too, but as we've mentioned multiple times, it's not just Jerry that goes. It's not just Scott that goes. It's all the people behind the scenes that go as well, because the new people would want their own people. And for an organization that prides itself on draft, develop, and trade, while the trades are hit or miss, the draft and develop's been pretty good. And you would use that as your rationale to keep at very least the front office around, which leads us, Lyle, to scenario number 2, and the one I think is most likely. You could sit here and think that Jerry Dipoto is doing a good job, but you don't think the coaching staff has got enough out of their players, which, to be honest, based on the performance on the field this season, if that's your opinion, I think that is a rational take. The front office and the ownership could say these players should be playing a whole lot better than they are currently playing right now. And Jerry can't control how well those players play when he acquires them, but the people who are down there on the field coaching certainly can. I would say that's my rationale for why I think scenario 2 would be most likely. And I'm not, I'll say comment section, not listening to you guys. That was my own opinion. Not listening to all the fire service comments we get.
It's like anytime I post anything from a Scott Service media session these days, it's like walking through the ring of fire in those comments. Good Lord, man. But anyway, yeah, I think you're right. Like, I think the front office is pretty safe, to be honest, because here's what I keep circling back to, despite Jerry's contract not yet being renewed. One, if you get a new front office regime, breaking news, people, I'm sure most of you know this, but I'm going to say it anyway. A new front office doesn't mean you're getting a new payroll budget. Ownership's not changing. So I don't know what you expect out of a new front office. Again, Scott Braun said this to us way back in the offseason, and I think he's been right as rain about it. Jerry Dipoto is the right person for the job here in Seattle. There are not a lot of other GMs out there, president of baseball ops out there, that are given this strict of a budget and say, and are told, do something with almost no resources, and as a result have been able to do something with it. I don't know how many other regimes are out there that are open and available for hire that could actually level up what Dipoto's been able to do with essentially hands tied behind his back. And here's the second point. If this regime goes, do you trust the people that are responsible to make the decision for hiring the new front office to do a good job of it? I'm going to be honest, I don't really. That because it would fall on the ownership group to do so. I'm going to be honest. I do not have confidence in them to make a hire that would level it up. I don't.
Here's another point on the side of scenario number 2 here, is that you and I are in agreement the hitting strategy needs a complete system-wide overhaul in the offseason. System-wide. Mm-hmm. There's no way you could put out offensive production like they have this year and not make drastic changes. And this isn't just a hiring of Brant Brown from outside the organization. By the way, in case you were curious, exact same offensive production before he was fired and after he was fired. Exact same. So, in case you were wondering about that. But also, it's not just adding one coach. I mean, it is going to be a complete revamp. Complete. And that plays right into scenario number 2 because, unfortunately, that means people are going to lose their jobs because of that. If you're making a drastic change like that, someone's going to lose their job because of that. So that's, that just feels like the most likely scenario. It feels like even if Scott is not the main scapegoat of all of this, maybe the players just do need a new voice. Maybe they need a different communication style. Scott's pretty laid back with his players. Maybe this group needs a different tone. Maybe they need someone a little more aggressive, a little less laid back, a little more, I'd say, intense. Not every player vibes with that, but if this group meshes with that more, then perhaps that's the voice you need.
Which leads to scenario number 3, which I honestly think is the least likely of all 4, which is the coaching staff stays and the front office goes. I would be pretty shocked if that was what happened. I think it's far and away of these 4 scenarios the least likely to happen of all of them.
Yeah, I agree with you. And usually, if front offices go, the new front office wants their own coaching staff. So exactly. Even if the lame duck coaching staff stayed, they would get fired by the new regime. And then there's scenario number 4 where everyone stays. I don't see a scenario where I'll put it as blank as this: if Scott Service and Jerry Dipoto both being employed at the end of after this season, if they miss the playoffs, I don't see it. Even if you want to find a reason why you believe in them, and I think there's plenty of reasons to believe in them. There are some pretty clear numbers that would work against those guys, 100%. They will have made the playoffs once in 9 seasons as a regime. If you want to come and say, TJ, they haven't really been in their contention window allowed to go Jerry's way until 2019 when they started their rebuild.
I'd even call it 2021 because when they started
exactly. So the rebuild started in 19, but the contention window opened in 2021. Even if you do that, that's 1 playoff appearance in 4 seasons. Of any organization that seriously cares about winning, like from the top down, winning is the number 1 priority, and you're in a contention window, is 1 playoff appearance and 2 total playoff wins in a 4-year stretch good enough?
No. You wouldn't see the Yankees do that. You wouldn't see the Dodgers do that. It's true.
Yeah, even though the Yankees have had Brian Cashman for a long time.
Yeah, time.
But most other organizations would not do that. Like Heimblum got canned last offseason for not being good enough in the Red Sox. And you can go to other organizations that would do the exact same thing. So ultimately, even if you want to give Jerry a break for the first few years where they had a bunch of vets on the roster, he didn't have a lot of resources to add, he didn't get to do things his way, well, he's finally gotten to do things his way. And if they miss the playoffs, it'll be once in 4 seasons. And that's just unacceptable. You have to win more. You have to win more if winning is your number 1 priority, which is unfortunate. And then the case for some people, Lyle, would also be why scenario 4 is unlikely. That in the front office sense, there are plenty of people out there who think that you could find somebody who could build with a smaller payroll better than Jerry Dipoto. Like Eric Neander with the Rays, for example. They win a lot with a payroll half as big as the Mariners. I don't know what their payroll is this year. It's quite a bit smaller than what the Mariners have this season. So someone could say, well, scenario 1 or scenario 3. One of those scenarios I would be in for because I feel like you can find a front office that can build within the margins of a smaller payroll better than Jerry Dipoto has. And maybe it's because Jerry Dipoto thought it was going to be bigger and the rug got pulled out from under him and it struggled to adjust because the contracts were already signed. But at this point, the fans say, oh, well, doesn't matter to us.
Yeah. The Rays are 28th in baseball in payroll.
Over
9. So they're at just over $94 million. The Mariners, as we currently sit, are 17th, $141 million.
Yeah. That's a pretty significant gap.
Now, there's not many Eric Neanders out there, I'll say that. So, which again, you can make the argument of there are people out there that could do more with less, like in terms of payroll, than what Dipoto's done. The follow-up to that is, do you trust this ownership group to find that person? Do you trust them to do that? They're not taking Neander away from the Rays. I'd be shocked if they did. So if it's not Eric Neander, who? Like,
I don't know.
Is this ownership group baseball savvy enough to find that person?
That's why you hire a search firm. Like college football. Mariners are going to have a college football offseason.
Be a wild offseason. Also, could you imagine the discourse on Twitter if absolutely nothing changed, just totally status quo?
It'd be terrible. You and I would be pissed. They cannot miss the playoffs again. They cannot.